My name is Eva Carrington, and I stood alone while my father was lowered into the ground. It was an overcast morning, the kind that made everything feel heavier than it already was. The sky wasn't crying for us, no dramatic downpour, no cinematic thunderclaps, just a dull, gray hush that settled over the cemetery like a secret. The air hung thick with perfume, wilted lilies, and unfinished words, but the silence didn't belong to me. No, it belonged to my sister Bianca, who shattered it with laughter. Again. She stood a few rows behind me, dressed in some obscenely expensive black designer outfit that clung to her body like attention. Her sunglasses were oversized and tinted just dark enough to hide the complete lack of grief in her eyes. Her friends flanked her like well-trained accessories, nodding along, whispering into gloved hands, smirking like this wasn't a funeral, but just another high-end brunch with a slightly more somber theme. I didn't look at her directly. I had learned not to over the years. I'd come to understand that Bianca lived off reactions the way some people lived off air, and I refused to feed her. Instead, I focused on the mahogany casket before me, smooth, polished, paid for with my savings. I clutched a single white rose in my palm, the thorns having already left their quiet imprint along the lifeline of my hand. My fingers trembled, but not from weakness, from restraint, from holding back. The kind of grief that didn't come with tears but with tight chests and swallowed screams. From knowing that I had loved him truly, missily, deeply in ways Bianca had never even tried to understand, I stepped forward and laid the rose atop his casket, whispering words I couldn't say out loud in front of them. Thank you for seeing me at the end. And that's when it happened. Bianca's voice sliced through the hush like a shard of glass. Maybe now she can finally afford a real dress. A few polite chuckles followed. I didn't flinch, I didn't turn. That would have been a reward, and I had stopped giving Bianca rewards a long time ago. Instead, I let the comment hang in the air like smoke, ugly, lingering, but harmless if you didn't inhale. She wanted a scene, she always did. She wanted me to cry or storm off or at least throw a bitter look over my shoulder. But I had learned that silence when you wear it right can slice sharper than a scream. I stayed still. My eyes stayed on the casket. I let her dig her own grave with her words. They didn't know the truth, none of them did. To them, I was the quiet one, the plain one, the daughter who never quite sparkled in a room. Bianca had been the favorite, the golden child, the one Dad bragged about at parties when she still pretended to pick up the phone. I used to wonder if maybe that was just who I was meant to be, the background. But not in the end. Not when it mattered. In the last year of his life, when the world stopped pretending everything was fine, I was the one who stayed. Bianca was busy, being photographed in vineyards, co-hosting panels about branding yourself through grief without a hint of irony. I, on the other hand, sat in hospital rooms that smelled like bleach and resignation. I memorized the rhythm of oxygen machines and watched the sharp deflation in Dad's face each time his lungs betrayed him. I held the paper cups while he sipped water with trembling hands. I read the medical reports no one else wanted to understand. I adjusted the tubing, held the vomit basin, listened to the slurred stories that came from a place deeper than pain, stories that sounded like regrets. And sometimes he cried, softly. Always when he thought I couldn't hear, always about her. He told me once, his voice thin, ragged like paper, that he had been wrong, that he had loved too blindly, too eagerly, too far, that he mistook noise for presence, charm for loyalty. I didn't say anything. I never made him explain. I think he knew I wouldn't need him to. Toward the end, he asked me to help with the paperwork. Not the bills, not the daily things, the other papers, the ones with lawyers' names and words like executor and beneficiary. I sat beside him while his fingers, stiff and blue-veined, scrawled out decisions that he said felt like justice. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. He was lucid, that much I remember. No confusion, no coaxing, just clarity, almost too much of it, like it had waited until the final chapters to sharpen. Now, the lawyer stood not far from us. He held a folder. Inside was everything that Bianca thought she already owned: the house, the estate, the trust, the car she had already taken selfies in. She thought the spotlight would follow her past the grave. But my father had other plans. Bianca laughed at me in my grief. But she didn't know that my grief was carrying something far heavier than sorrow. It carried truth, it carried loyalty, it carried the quiet love of a man who finally saw me for who I was, not loud, not glamorous, Not perfect but real. She didn't know that Dad's final words would not be spoken by me or even by him. They would be spoken by the will. And that was coming next. It started with a phone call, one of those that changes everything but comes wrapped in nothing more than a dull ring on a Tuesday afternoon. The hospital asked if I was the emergency contact for a Mr. Charles Carrington. I paused. I was, but only because no one else had bothered to be. Bianca's name had once been on every form, every document, every family Christmas card, but when it came to sickness, to decline, to anything that didn't come with a red carpet or camera flash, she vanished like mist and sun. So I said yes. Yes, I was the contact. Yes, I would come. The first time I saw him in that bed, I almost didn't recognize him. My father, once tall and broad and commanding even in silence, looked smaller somehow. The kind of small that has nothing to do with size and everything to do with what life has taken away. The oxygen tube seemed too large for his face. His hands, those hands that used to grip my shoulders when I cried as a child, lay motionless on the blanket, spotted and thin. He opened his eyes and blinked slowly. Eva, he said. Not finally, not you came, just my name, like a small apology hidden inside two syllables. I don't know what I expected to feel, bitterness, maybe resentment. A flash of triumph that he needed me now, when all my life I had stood second to the spotlight that was Bianca. But I didn't feel any of those things. What I felt, unexpectedly, was something simpler, sadness, for the man he was. For the man he could have been. For the daughter he didn't know he had until it was almost too late. I sat down beside him, and I stayed, that first night. I learned how to reset the oxygen tank and where the nurses kept the spare linens. I made a list of medications I couldn't pronounce and set alarms for dosages that ran through the night. There was no drama, no declarations, just need, and I filled it, quietly, completely. Over the months, I came to know every creak in the house we once shared. I memorized the sounds of his breathing from the next room and could tell from the rustle of his sheets when he was too cold, or when he couldn't sleep. We didn't talk about the past. It was too painful, too jagged around the edges. Instead, we existed in the present together, at last. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with something like disbelief, like he couldn't quite understand how I had become this woman, the one who stayed, and then he would look away, ashamed. I never made him say sorry. That wasn't what this was about. But still, the silence between us was not empty. It was full of things unspoken, of memories revisited in glances and soft sighs, and slowly, he began to talk. Not like a father to a daughter, not at first, more like a man desperate to unburden. He talked about mistakes, about how easy it is to love the wrong things in people. Bianca, he said one night, made everything look beautiful, even the lies. I didn't respond. What was there to say? He had chosen her for years, applauded her, invested in her, believed her. Even when she said I was jealous, small-minded, petty. I remember being 15 and hearing him laugh as Bianca mocked the poems I wrote. Ava's always been a little intense, she'd said, and he'd agreed, not unkindly, just dismissively, like I was a phase he was waiting for me to grow out of. But I didn't grow out of being myself. I grew into it alone. And now here we were, him, no longer towering, me no longer invisible. He began to ask questions about my job, my life, my dreams, and I answered not out of obligation, but because part of me had waited for this my entire life, to be seen, not pitied, not compared, just seen. Then came the day he asked me to help with the papers. It was subtle at first. He mentioned wanting to get things in order, like he was talking about clearing a desk, not facing death. I brought the lawyer. Bianca wasn't told. She was too busy filming a brand campaign for luxury wellness products in Napa. Anyway, we sat at the old oak table in the dining room, Dad, me, and the lawyer. The air was still, not somber, not heavy, just still, like something was holding its breath. Dad's voice was steady. Every choice was deliberate. Eva, he said, has been my caretaker, my companion, my strength. She deserves to be recognized for that, fully. The lawyer nodded, scribbled. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat ached from the pressure of words I couldn't let out. Fear, gratitude, sorrow. All I could do was place my hand over Dad's and let the silence speak for me. He signed the papers, pages and pages of them, trusts, titles, instructions. And then, in private, he handed me a sealed envelope. For the reading, he said, she's going to be furious, but maybe now she'll see. I didn't know if I wanted Bianca to see, I didn't know if that was even possible, but I took the envelope. And now, days later, it sits in the lawyer's hand, a quiet bomb waiting to detonate. Bianca is laughing somewhere behind me, still thinking she's won, still thinking that everything is hers because it always has been. But I know something, she does and single quotes t. The last year of our father's life didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. The room smelled like polished wood and expensive cologne. It was the kind of space that was made to feel important, with its oversized windows, heavy bookshelves lined with law volumes no one had probably opened in years, and a grandfather clock that ticked loudly. We were seated around a long walnut table, its surface gleaming and empty except for a single cream-colored envelope and a pitcher of water that no one touched. Bianca sat directly across from me. Legs crossed, posture impeccable, sunglasses still on despite being indoors. She had changed after the funeral into something sleeker, more fashionable, as if mourning was a photo shoot with costume changes. Her lips were painted a shade of rose too bold for grief, and her perfume sweet, cloying, and too strong settled over the room like fog. She tapped her manicured nails against the table in rhythm with the clock, a soft percussion of entitlement. She looked bored, or maybe she wanted to look bored. As if all this, the reading of our father's last will and testament, was merely a formality before she could claim what she believed was hers. She didn't acknowledge me, not a glance, not a twitch of recognition. I could have been anyone, a distant cousin, the help. But that was her way to erase me with indifference. The lawyer cleared his throat, slow and deliberate. His name was Mr. Redgrave, and he looked exactly as you'd expect, silver hair, measured voice, and a calmness that came from years of watching families unravel in rooms just like this one. He adjusted his glasses and unsealed the envelope with a letter opener that glinted like a knife. "I want to thank you both for being here," he began, though his gaze lingered longer on me. "Your father left specific instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. These instructions were updated and notarized 3 months prior to his passing. While he was of sound mind and body, there is a written letter enclosed as well, to be read after the legal directives." Bianca made a soft sound, half scoff, half sigh. "Can we skip to the part where I inherit the house?" she said, not unkindly, but with the sort of fox charm she used with men and waiters. "I have a dinner reservation at 8. Double quotes. Mr. Redgrave didn't flinch. He simply began. It started predictably, a small donation to the hospital where Dad spent his final months, a sum allocated to the Carrington Foundation, one he had always donated to, mostly out of habit. Bianca was barely listening. She had leaned back in her chair and was scrolling through her phone beneath the table. I watched her face carefully, and I realized she hadn't even prepared for the idea that this might not go her way. It had never occurred to her. And then everything shifted. "To my daughter Eva Carrington," Mr. Redgrave said, "I leave the Carrington estate in full house, land, and all assets therein, including bank holdings, vehicles, art, and heirlooms." The room stopped. Just stopped. Bianca froze mid-scroll, her jaw visibly tightening. She lifted her sunglasses with one finger, revealing eyes that were suddenly sharp, alert, calculating. "What?" she asked. But it wasn't really a question, it was a warning. Mr. Redgrave continued, "The remainder of the estate, including the investment portfolio and all trusts, are also to be transferred solely to Eva Carrington, for reasons of loyalty, care, and presence, as documented in Mr. Carrington's written statement." Silence crashed down like thunder. I didn't move, I didn't blink. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, the heat rising in my chest. I hadn't expected it to hit this hard, not here, not now. But hearing it aloud, spoken into a room where I had always been second, always been nothing, it broke something open in me. Bianca laughed. It wasn't the laugh from the funeral. This one was brittle, strangled, laced with disbelief. "This is a joke," she said, flipping her hair. "He must have been sedated, confused. He adored me. Everyone knows that." Mr. Redgrave remained composed. "Your father made these decisions of his own volition and full mental capacity. He was very clear. The documents were witnessed, signed, and sealed in accordance with the law." "No." She stood up, palms flat on the table, eyes blazing. "No, this is wrong. He was manipulated. She pointed at me like I was a stain. She took advantage of him. He didn't know what he was doing." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I had no interest in justifying my love, my time. Or my loyalty to a woman who didn't even show up to say goodbye? I sat still, not smug, not victorious, just still, because I knew what came next. Redgrave lifted a smaller, folded letter from the envelope. Your father also left this, he said. A personal message. Would you like it read aloud? I nodded once. He unfolded the paper, cleared his throat again, and began, to my daughters, I have made choices that may surprise one of you and comfort the other. These choices were not easy, but they were honest. I spent my life mistaking charisma for closeness, noise for love. I do not blame anyone for that but myself. Eva. You were my quiet strength when I had none. You sat with me in my worst moments, never asking for anything in return. I leave you what I can, not as a reward, but as a thank you for staying, for seeing me. Bianca, I hope you find what it is you've been chasing all these years. I hope it brings you peace, Dad. Mr. Redgrave folded the letter gently and placed it on the table. Bianca didn't speak. Her face had gone still, cold. She picked up her purse in one sharp motion, knocking over the champagne flute someone had placed in front of her. It hit the floor and shattered. And with that, she left. The door clicked shut behind Bianca with the sharpness of an ending. Not a slam, she was far too composed for that, but it was final. The kind of sound that settles into the floorboards. And the silence after. I sat there for a few moments, staring at the broken glass on the floor. The champagne had pooled beneath the table, golden and sticky like something wasted. No one moved to clean it up. Redgrave cleared his throat, but it wasn't the professional kind this time. It was softer, almost awkward. Would you like some time? He asked me. I shook my head. No, I think I've had enough time. He nodded and began tidying the documents, careful and methodical. I watched his hands, his wedding ring catching the light now and then. There was something comforting in his detachment. He wasn't a part of this story, just the one who read it aloud, a messenger. He had probably seen hundreds of these endings, but this one was mine, and it felt anything but typical. I'll send copies of everything by courier, he said, and we'll begin the transfer process by the end of the week. Thank you, I said. My voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse and thin outside. I could see the last of the funeral guests drifting away through the window. Some of them were probably confused by now why Bianca hadn't taken the stage as usual, why I was still sitting inside while she stormed off. But no one would say anything. That was the Carrington way. Appearances first, truth last. If ever, I stood slowly. My knees ached. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself. Every muscle was clenched. Every thought wrapped around the idea of just getting through the will. I hadn't prepared for what came next. The walk to the car felt surreal. The sky was still dull, and the clouds hung low, brushing the tops of the hedges like they were trying to listen in. My heels crunched over gravel, and with every step I took, the weight of it all sank in a little deeper. I had inherited everything. The house, the estate, the money Bianca had already counted on, the art she used to boast about to her friends as if it were hers, the car she had claimed with captions like Dad's old toy, mine now. All of it, every square inch of our father's legacy now belonged to the daughter who was never supposed to matter. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. When I reached the car, I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, grateful for the cocoon of quiet it offered. My hands rested on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, letting the reality sink into my skin, my bones. I thought about the house, the one Bianca had once referred to as practically hers, the one she brought photographers into last summer to shoot a heritage-inspired fashion spread, without ever asking Dad. I'd found the photos online, scrolling late one night during a hospital shift, and watched her twirl through the library and pose in front of the fireplace like she owned every memory between those walls. And now, the keys were mine. But the truth was, I didn't even know if I wanted the house. That place had always felt more like a shrine to someone I was never allowed to be, a Carrington in name but not in presence. It was full of grand things and quiet silences, of dinners, where I'd sat across from Bianca as Dad praised her for grades I knew she hadn't earned and ignored the scholarships I worked 2 jobs to get. I had worked so hard to stay small, unnoticed, invisible even. It had been safer that way, and yet here I was, at the center of everything. My phone buzzed in my lap. A text from a number I hadn't saved, but I recognized the tone before I even opened it. B, I hope you're proud, you've ruined everything. I stared at the message, There were no pleasantries, no questions. Just blame, sharp and fast. Bianca never asked. She accused. I didn't reply, because the truth was, I hadn't ruined anything. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't schemed or plotted or whispered into Dad's ear while he was weak. I had sat beside him, fed him, held his hand when he was afraid. I hadn't done it to earn anything. I'd done it because it was the right thing to do. But that was the part Bianca would never understand. She believed love was a transaction. She gave charm and expected rewards. She posed and smiled and waited for the applause. But real love doesn't need an audience. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's showing up day after day after day, even when no one thanks you, especially then. I finally started the car and pulled out of the lot, the sky shifting above me, like it was waiting. The road ahead was familiar, but I knew everything had changed when I reached a red light. I looked down at my phone again. This time, I opened a blank message for a second. I thought about writing back, just one sentence, "You left long before." Dad did, but instead, I locked the screen and set it aside. I didn't need to explain myself. Not anymore. Let Bianca spin whatever story she needed to protect her ego. Let her rage in silence and call it injustice. I wasn't going to be her echo chamber. Dad had already spoken for me. In life, she had the spotlight. In death, he gave me his voice. I didn't go to the house right away. For days, I drove past it without stopping, circling the neighborhood like a stray to ensure of its welcome. Each time I passed the wrought iron gates, a part of me curled inward, aching with something I couldn't name. Grief, yes, but more than that, memory. The kind of memory that's buried so deep it only surfaces in the shape of smells and shadows. It was almost a week after the will when I finally pulled into the driveway. The gravel crunched beneath my tires the same way it always had, but everything else felt unfamiliar. The hedges were trimmed, the lawn manicured. The Carringtons prized roses in bloom, but it all felt staged, like the set of a life that had already ended. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring up at the house that was now legally mine. It was beautiful, undeniably an old colonial revival with tall windows, weathered brick, and ivy that had grown rebelliously over the side. Bianca used to say it looked like it belonged in a movie. I always thought it looked like a place where people pretended not to feel anything real. When I finally walked up the steps and unlocked the door, the echo that met me was instant. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the presence of everything left unsaid. The scent of old wood and faint cologne still lingered, and the light filtering through the foyer windows caught dust in the air like it was freezing time itself. I didn't cry. I didn't walk from room to room like some sentimental movie scene. I just stood there, letting it sink in. This was mine, the place where I'd grown up in the corners, where Bianca hosted birthday parties with guest lists and photographers, while I snuck away to the attic with library books, where our father had praised her from the head of the table. While I quietly passed the salt and swallowed the sting, I wandered into the study, his study, the last room he'd truly lived in. The leather chair still sat turned toward the window, and his reading glasses rested atop a book that hadn't been moved. I reached for them without thinking. Running my thumb along the frame, they were warm from the sun, and for a second, I could almost believe he'd just stepped out of the room. The memories hit me like waves, sitting across from him while he asked me finally, gently, about my life, holding his hand as he drifted into sleep during those last few weeks. Listening to his voice grow thinner, but more honest, I sank into the chair and closed my eyes. I don't want her to have it, he'd said one night, voice raspy, eyes glassy but alert. She'll sell it, Eva. She'll strip the soul from this place and turn it into content. I hadn't argued. I knew he was right. But now I wondered what I would do with it. This wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum of all the things we didn't say, a museum of what we pretended to be, and now I was the curator. I spent the rest of the day walking through each room like I was learning the place for the first time. Some of it was exactly how I remembered: the ornate chandelier in the dining room that never quite matched the rest of the house. The guest bedroom still made up like it expected Bianca to visit, even though she hadn't stepped foot in it in over a year. And then there were the things that hurt more: his slippers still beside the bed, a scarf I had wear upon for him, tucked in the hall closet, the oxygen tank in the corner, its emptiness so much louder than when it was full. I didn't touch any of it, not yet. That night, I slept in my old room, I hadn't planned to. I'd brought a suitcase and everything, intending to drive back to my apartment, but something rooted me there. Maybe it was the weight of it all. Maybe I just didn't want to leave him again, lying in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling I used to cover with glow-in-the-dark stars. I thought about Bianca. I imagined her in some sterile penthouse, furiously rewriting the narrative. She'd make herself the victim. She always did. Maybe she was already posting about betrayal in cryptic captions, rallying sympathy from people who didn't know better. I didn't care. Not out of cruelty. Just exhaustion. I was tired of bending myself into someone understandable. I was tired of shrinking next to her, trying to justify my quiet love, my unglamorous loyalty. If Dad had taught me anything in those final months, it was this: presence matters, not appearances. Not applause, just showing up, even when it's hard. Especially then, before I drifted to sleep, I whispered into the dark, "I'm here, Dad." There was no reply, just the steady creak of the house settling, like it, too, was finally breathing out. The following morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window pane, an almost gentle knock from the sky. The room was still dim, and the house, for all its grandeur, felt cold in that uniquely quiet way of old places that hadn't been truly lived in for some time. I sat up slowly, cocooned in the comforter I once used as a teenager to hide from the world, and for a few moments, I let myself remember what it felt like to be invisible here. But things were different now. After showering and making myself tea in the outdated but still functional kitchen, I returned to the study. That room held more of my father than anywhere else. It smelled of tobacco and dust and time, a cocktail of memory I hadn't realized I'd missed. I spent most of the morning going through the drawers of his desk, not because I was looking for anything in particular, but because I needed to know what he left behind. The small things no lawyer or notary would have catalogued. I found old photographs tucked between manila folders, his high school class ring, a fountain pen set I remembered him cherishing, and a drawer full of business cards with names I hadn't heard in years. There were no surprises. Not at first, just remnants of a life lived mostly in habit, of a man who had once been too proud to ask for help until his lungs forced him to. But then, near the bottom of the last drawer, beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found a small wooden box. It wasn't locked, just sealed shut in that intimate way of things not meant for anyone but the owner. I opened it. Inside, there was a bundle of letters, dozens of them, tied together with frayed blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I picked them up. They weren't mine. They weren't from me. The handwriting on the envelopes wasn't Dad's, either. They were from Bianca. At first, I couldn't understand. The envelopes were dated over a span of 10 years, some from as far back as when we were teenagers, others more recent. The postmarks traced her travels: New York, London, Milan, LA. Each one addressed to Dad, written in her handwriting ornate, almost theatrical. Curious, I opened the top one, a letter from 2 years ago. "Daddy, I know I haven't been home in a while. Work's insane, and everyone wants a piece of me these days. But you understand, don't you? You always said I was your star. That's what stars do, right? Shine where they're needed." I read on. It was exactly what I expected: overly affectionate, performative, dripping with flattery. Not a word about him, not really. It was all about her. Every letter was a monologue about her brand, her life, her photo shoots, her pressure. The guilt was always dressed up as affection. "I miss you so much, it hurts, but I just can't slow down." But that wasn't what unsettled me. What unsettled me was that these letters had never been opened, not one. Each envelope remained perfectly sealed, not torn, not unfolded, just filed away, like artifacts from a life Dad had stopped believing in. Why hadn't he read them? Had he known what they were without needing to open them? Or had he opened the first few years ago and stopped, tired of watching her bend her absence into poetry? I found one from 6 months ago, the most recent. The return address was LA. Again, unopened, I stared at it, wondering what she'd written this time. A plea for attention, a list of excuses wrapped in glitter. I debated whether to open it, and then I did. Her words spilled across the page in familiar loops. "I hope you're proud of me. The Vogue feature comes out next week, full spread. They called me a modern icon, Dad, just like you said I would be. I'm flying to London after, but maybe I'll come by for a weekend. I'll try. Things are crazy here." And then, at the bottom, in smaller letters, almost like an afterthought. I heard from Eva that you're not doing well. I hope she's not making it sound worse than it is. She always did love the role of the martyr. There it was, even from afar she had found a way to discredit me. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box, anger blooming hot behind my eyes. It wasn't just the words, it was the assumption that even in his dying days, I was playing a part, that my love was performative while hers, in absence, was somehow pure. But what struck me most wasn't her bitterness, it was his silence. He had never replied. These were not treasured letters, they were discarded attempts. He had kept them, yes, but untouched, not out of love. Out of a painful need to record her distance, I placed the box back in the drawer, gently, like setting down something that might explode if mishandled, and then I sat there, in the quiet of the study, feeling the full weight of what it meant. My father had known her. Not the curated version, not the one she sold to the world, the real one, the one who took and called it love, and he had made his choice. In the end, he left the house to the daughter who sat with him, not the one who sent postcards of promises she never kept. The validation didn't feel like victory, it felt like grief in a different form. But it was mine. It was just afternoon when I heard the knock. Not the soft, uncertain kind you'd expect from someone who knew they weren't welcome, no. This knock was deliberate, 3 sharp raps, confident, like the person on the other side assumed they belonged. I knew before I opened the door. Bianca stood on the porch in a beige trench coat and pointed heels, her lips glossed, her hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless but weren't. She wore sunglasses again, though the rain had stopped hours ago. Behind her, a black SUV idled with the engine running. She had no intention of staying long. I want to talk, she said. I didn't move. You could have called. You wouldn't have answered. She replied flatly. Besides, this felt more cinematic. Of course it did. I stepped aside and let her in, not because I wanted to, but because some small part of me was curious, what version of herself would she wear today? She walked into the foyer like she still owned it, her heels clicked against the hardwood as she looked around, her gaze lingering on the staircase, the chandelier, the framed painting Dad always insisted on keeping despite her saying it was dated and tragic. She didn't take off her coat. Looks the same, she said. It's only been a week, I replied. Bianca turned to me then, and for the first time in years, I saw something break through her polish. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin beneath them just slightly puffy, not enough to ruin her appearance, but enough to suggest something had slipped under her skin. Why did you let it get that far? She asked, voice low. The will, the letter, the public humiliation. You let him cut me out like I was nothing. I blinked. You think I let him? He wasn't himself, Eva, you know that. He was more himself than he'd ever been. She flinched, just barely, and then masked it with a scoff. Oh, come on, he was dying. You were there every day, whispering in his ear, filling his head with truth. I cut in, filling his head with truth. Bianca's jaw clenched. He loved me, I'm sure he did once. The way people love ideas. You were his golden girl until you weren't. She crossed her arms. And you think that makes you better? No, I said quietly, just present. We stood in silence, not the kind laced with affection or shared understanding, the kind that crackles, tense and bitter. The silence of 2 people who have stopped pretending they're in the same story. I didn't come here to fight, she said after a beat. I came to ask for what's fair. I almost laughed. Fair, yes, the house, the accounts, the car. He never meant for you to take all of it. He gave it to me, but that was before. No, I said, stepping closer. That was after he watched you ignore him, after he read your letters. I caught myself. Actually, never mind. He didn't read them. Not a single one. Her face drained of color. You sent them like gifts wrapped in performance, and he kept them like proof of what you never did. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to know, the one who cried when her dolls broke, who begged me to hide under the covers with her during storms. But the moment passed. You're really going to do this, she said. Let him pit us against each other even now? He didn't pit us against each other, I said. You did, a long time ago, and I stopped playing. Bianca turned toward the front door. Her hands trembled as she reached for the knob, but her voice was steady. This isn't over, Eva, it already is. She paused, then looked back at me with something I couldn't quite name, not hate, not sadness, something closer to fear. You think you've won, she said, but all you have is this house full of ghosts. I didn't respond. I didn't need to dot as she walked out. The air in the foyer shifted lighter somehow, like something had left with her. I stood alone again, just like at the funeral, but this time, I wasn't grieving the same man. I wasn't the same daughter. And the house mine now, truly mine, felt a little less haunted. The next morning, I opened every window in the house. It wasn't symbolic at first. I wasn't trying to make a statement. The air inside had grown stale, clinging to curtains and carpet like the breath of someone who had stayed too long. I just wanted to let it out. The rooms, once heavy with the scent of old cologne and lost years, began to breathe again. The breeze slipped in slowly, shy at first, then all at once carrying the smell of damp soil, lilacs, and something clean. I moved through the house barefoot, no music, no distractions, just me. The creaking of floorboards and the quiet hum of a place exhaling. I started in the study. It felt right, somehow, that the first thing I let go of was the chair. The leather armchair he always sat in, now stiff and faded, groaned as I pushed it away from the window. I rolled up the rug beneath it, ornate, antique, too formal to be called warm, and folded it carefully. I didn't toss it. I wasn't erasing him. I was making space. The books came next, rows and rows of titles he'd collected but never read. Some had cracked spines and folded corners. Others were pristine and touched. I packed them into boxes for the library downtown, not out of disrespect, but because someone else might still find meaning in them. I kept a few, the ones with his handwriting in the margins, the ones I remembered him reading when he was too tired to talk. As I dusted the shelves, I thought about something he once told me back when we'd stopped pretending that time was endless. I spent too many years collecting things, he'd said, and not enough collecting people. I hadn't known how to respond, so I just held his hand and let him drift into sleep. I kept thinking about that now. Each time I removed something that no longer felt like mine. The house wasn't a museum. It didn't need to preserve who he had been. It needed to reflect who I was now, and maybe who I'd always been before I was made to feel like a footnote. In the hallway closet, I found one of Bianca's old coats, fur-lined, dramatically tailored, a tag still on it. She must have left it there during one of her quick drop-ins when Dad was too tired to ask her to stay. I held it for a moment, unsure of what to do with it. Part of me wanted to toss it out the window to make a spectacle of my detachment, but that wasn't me. I folded it, placed it in a donation bag, and moved on. Upstairs, I returned to the guest bedroom. The sheets had been washed, the pillows fluffed as if he'd kept it ready for her, still hoping she might arrive. I stripped the bed slowly. With every layer I removed, I felt something old peel off of me too. Grief didn't always come with tears. Sometimes it came with linens and silence and the steady rhythm of your own breathing as you tried not to remember too much at once. I turned that room into a writing space. I'd never had one before. Not really. My writing had lived in journals shoved into drawers, in notebooks filled at coffee shops, in the digital clutter of forgotten folders. But this room, bright, quiet, almost sacred, felt like a place where I could finally let the words settle. I brought in a simple desk, no gold trim, no leather, just wood and light and space. I found a photo of Dad and me tucked inside a drawer. We were on the porch, a summer afternoon I barely remembered. I looked young, maybe 16. He had his arm around me, and for once, he wasn't looking at Bianca. He was looking at me. I framed it and placed it on the new desk. Later that evening, I made myself dinner in the kitchen I used to tiptoe through, afraid to draw attention. I used his cast iron skillet, the one he'd always insisted I clean incorrectly, and I set the table for one without apology. When I sat down, I didn't feel lonely. I felt still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ache, but holds, the kind that says, "You're okay, you're here, you made it." I thought of Bianca. I wondered what version of me she was painting now in her stories, her conversations, her curated grief. I imagined her with a glass of wine, telling some carefully edited tale about betrayal and sisterhood and legacy, but the truth no longer needed defending. Dad had spoken, I had answered, and the house, this old, heavy, stubborn house, was finally beginning to echo back something I hadn't heard in years. Myself. The first time someone asked if I was the Carrington girl, I didn't flinch. It happened in a small bookstore, downtown, one of those quiet, dusty places where time softened around the edges. I was thumbing through a second-hand copy of a poetry collection when the clerk, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, looked up and smiled. "You're Eva, right?" She asked gently, Charles Carrington's daughter. I paused for half a breath before nodding. "I am." She smiled even wider. "He used to come in here once a month. Said it helped him feel grounded." I hadn't known that. Dad had never mentioned it. But suddenly, I could see him in that same corner chair near the window, running his fingers over spines, pretending he had time. Maybe that was before things got bad. Or maybe it was something he never shared because it didn't fit the version of him we all had to believe in. The powerful, poised man who filled rooms but emptied homes. The woman didn't ask questions. She just nodded, as if she understood there were layers beneath the name and didn't need to dig them up. And in that moment, something shifted. The Carrington name wasn't a weight I had to carry anymore. It was a part of me, yes, but it didn't define me. I didn't need to be ashamed of it, or shrink beneath it, or fight it. I could choose what it meant now. I walked out of that store with 3 books tucked under my arm and a strange, unfamiliar sense of permission. Like I had finally stepped out from behind a curtain I hadn't realized was there. Back at the house I started making plans, not for renovations or estate matters. For myself, I reopened my writing. The attic, once a graveyard of forgotten furniture and moth-eaten coats, became my quiet sanctuary. I set up a small table by the dormer window, brought in a lamp, a plant, a chair that didn't squeak, and I wrote. At first, it was just journaling, trying to untangle the knots Bianca had left in me, trying to name the ache of being overlooked for so long that you begin to believe you deserve it. But eventually, I started writing stories, real ones, fiction, maybe, but real all the same, about sisters, about silence, about how grief isn't always loud and love isn't always visible. I submitted one of them nervously, anonymously to a local literary journal. A month later, I got the acceptance email. They called it stark and beautiful. I cried, not because I had been published, but because someone had seen me, my voice, my truth, and called it worthy. I didn't tell Bianca. I didn't even think to. Somewhere along the way, I stopped measuring my growth against her presence. She sent one more message, weeks after her visit. Just a single line: "When you're ready to talk, you know where to find me." I never replied. Not because I was angry. The anger had passed. What lingered now was something softer. Almost tender, a quiet sadness for the version of us that might have existed if things had been different. I didn't hate her, but I didn't owe her healing at my expense. Instead, I poured my energy into building something new. I started organizing Dad's old contacts, the charitable ones, the business partners who hadn't turned their backs when he fell ill. Some of them remembered me, most didn't, but that didn't matter. I introduced myself anyway as Eva, not just Charles Carrington's daughter, but a writer, a woman with plans. I decided to start a community arts program, a small, quiet initiative. Not glamorous, not press-worthy, but real, a space for kids like I used to be, quiet, overlooked, full of stories and nowhere to put them. I named it the Rose Room, after the single white rose I placed on Dad's casket, the one symbol of love. That didn't need to shout to be heard. People showed up, not crowds, not headlines, just a few kids, a few teachers, some neighbors. And that was enough. More than enough. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. I'd left the study mostly intact, with a few personal touches. The guest room now held shelves of books and a futon for anyone who might stay. I'd planted new flowers in the front garden, and sometimes when I stood at the top of the driveway, I could feel the wind move through them like it was saying, finally. I had expected grief to feel like drowning, but it didn't. It felt more like peeling back a bandage to let air touch the wound. It stung, but then it healed. One afternoon, as I was walking through the foyer, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I paused, not to inspect, not to fix, just to look, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the girl in the shadows. I saw a woman, still healing, still learning, but standing steady. Whole. It was a warm morning in early spring when I returned to the cemetery. The last time I had stood here, I was frozen, body clenched, heart armored. My grief kept on a leash because there was too much noise around me. Bianca's laughter, whispered judgments, the crack of champagne against marble, the casket lowering, the weight of history on my back. But today, it was different. Today, it was just me. I walked alone across the dewy grass, careful not to step on the wildflowers that had crept in at the edges of the headstones. The cemetery was quiet except for birdsong, the wind slipping through the trees, and the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet. When I reached my father's grave, I stood still for a long time. The headstone was simple, elegant. His name etched in stone like it always belonged. There, below it, the words I had chosen. He saw the truth before the end. Not everyone understood those words when they read them. But they weren't for everyone, they were for me. I took the white rose from my bag and crouched down, placing it carefully at the base of the headstone. One single bloom, just like the one I had offered on the day we buried him, only this time, it wasn't an act of mourning, it was a gesture of peace. I'm okay. I said aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. I hope you are too. There were still things I wished he had said, still parts of me that wanted apologies he never knew how to give. But over the months, I had learned something unexpected. Closure isn't always a dramatic declaration. Sometimes it's just waking up one morning and realizing the pain doesn't take up as much space in your chest anymore. That you can breathe. That you're not looking over your shoulder for someone else's approval. I sat down in the grass, letting my dress wrinkle, not caring that the ground was damp. I thought about everything that had changed. The house was different now, not just in paint and furniture, but in energy. It no longer whispered of favoritism, absence, or betrayal. It had become a place of comfort, of creation, a home, not perfect but mine. Every room held a memory, yes, but they no longer haunted me. They grounded me. The rose room had grown. We now had a waiting list. A local artist had volunteered to teach twice a week. And a retired librarian hosted story hours every Saturday. Kids brought their drawings and poems, shy at first, then bold. One girl wrote a story about two sisters who stopped being enemies. I didn't ask if it was inspired by anyone. As for Bianca, we hadn't spoken again. There were days I wondered what would happen if she knocked on the door a second time. If she'd sit at the kitchen table and we'd talk not as rivals but as two women who had survived the same wreckage in different ways. But that day hadn't come. And maybe it never would. And maybe that was okay. I had stopped hoping for reconciliation and started hoping for her healing separately, quietly. Without needing to be part of it, I rose from the grass, brushed off my skirt, and looked around the cemetery one last time. The sun had risen fully now, casting light over the stones like a warm hand. I felt it on my face. I closed my eyes. For so long, I had lived like grief was something to endure silently, like power belonged only to those who shouted loudest. But it didn't. It never did. Power, I'd learned, was in showing up. In staying when no one asked you to. In choosing love over legacy. And peace over performance. In saying nothing when someone tries to break you and realizing they never could. I turned and walked back to the car, lighter than I had felt in years. No weight on my shoulders, no war in my chest. Just air. Just space. Just me. As I opened the door, I glanced back one last time at the white rose lying at the base of the headstone. It didn't need to be noticed. It didn't need to be posted or praised or envied. It just needed to be placed, and I had done that.